Ritual's complete, boys. We have become one with the Cauliflower. For today's build, we have the Cause Parasite +9 because we're not focused too much on the combat today, so I didn't want to waste a rock. Also got the Madman's Garb. Got some nice tentacle action, as do we. And we've got the Herald Gloves and Trousers from Simon, of course. And today we're going into the dungeons for the last time, actually. And we're going into Ish, I believe that's how it's pronounced. This is the last style of dungeon that we haven't seen. But before we do that, I need to grab an item from somebody in the fishing hamlet.
Blasphemous murders, blood-crazed fiends. Atonement for the wretches by the wrath of Mother Goss. Mercy for the poor wizard child. Mercy. Oh, please.
Oh, baby, please.
Curse here, curse there. A curse for he and she. White hair. A bottomless curse. A bottomless sea. Source of all greatness. All things that be. Listen for the baneful chants. Weep with them as one in trance. And weep with us. Oh, weep with us.
Okay. New item, Accursed Brew. I've always wanted one, and now I've got it. So, that was a new bit of dialogue that you only get if you have the Milkweed rune equipped when you talk to this guy. And this allows you to throw an accursed concoction at foes. Skull of a local from the violated fishing village. The inside of the skull was forcibly searched for eyes, as evidenced by the innumerable scratches and indentations. No wonder the skull became stewed in curses. They who offer baneful chants weep with them as one in trance. So this is a hunter's tool. There you go. Functions basically like a pyromancy from Dark Souls, because it has that sort of, you throw it and then there's an area of effect when it lands. It doesn't have a ton of range, unfortunately, but it is what it is. And we're also going to talk about this guy at some length today, because we're talking about cut content. And a lot of the gameplay today is just going to sort of serve as a backdrop. Like, I wanted an excuse to go into this final set of chalices, and this is what I came up with. So we're going to talk about some stuff that I dug up that I didn't even plan to find out new information, but I totally did. Also, interesting to note that he'll sometimes wind up to do a lightning strike and then he just doesn't. I don't have any further comment on that. But anyway, I learned some very interesting stuff, and I hope you will also find it equally as interesting. So, let's dive into those dungeons. The Ish dungeons. I think it's Ish. That's my best guess at a pronunciation. It's hard to tell sometimes when no one says it in game. Speaking of which, the final boss of this area and the first boss in the next episode, which I've already fought because you have to fight this boss to get the chalice for this area, but god damn it, I wanted to do it in the final episode for some reason. Anyway, this boss has this name, and there are many different ways that people pronounce it, and I would always say Ebrietas, or like some similar variant of that. Also, I'm going to go ahead and have my HUD on for this episode just because I'm going to be using a lot of hunter tools, and they use blood bullets, and so I got to like keep track of that, and it's easier. Okay. So, Ebrietas, that's how I pronounced it, and nobody says it in the game, and so everybody has their own pronunciation for it. But it turns out that the blood minister, I guess you would call him, the guy from the very first cutscene of the game, who's wheelchair bound in Yosefka's clinic, he has some cut dialogue, and I guess take everything that I'm going to talk about with a grain of salt because it's cut content. It's just interesting stuff to think about. But I think in the case of pronunciation, you could probably assume that that is the correct pronunciation. Anyhow, this guy refers to the awakening of Ebrietas. So boom, there's a pronunciation right there. I've never heard anyone pronounce it that way. I'm sure some people have, but I personally just haven't heard it pronounced that way, and it's just nice to know. But on top of that, I uncovered just a whole bunch of stuff about Ebrietas, the moon presence, and Cause, most of whom we have seen in this playthrough up to this point. I think we have technically seen the moon presence. We initiated the boss battle, but we didn't finish it because if you do, then the game starts over. I don't want to do that yet. I think there is a way to game it and like not trigger New Game Plus, but I'd rather just play it safe. Anyhow, let me just jump into it. Let me see here. And I'll try to provide as many links in the video, and well, I may provide links to the video. We'll see. I'll try to provide links in the video at relevant times to like the relevant video where I learned this information. And I'll definitely be putting links in the description. Sounds dumb shortening. Anyway, let's see, where do I start? So it turns out this probably isn't much of a surprise if you think about it, but there was a lot of ideas and characters were kind of shifting around in the early days of development for this game, or relatively early. Ooh, I think something interesting is about to happen on screen, though. Yeah, this is something we haven't seen before, and it might be specific to Ish Chalices. Again, I'm not a tomb prospector, so I don't know. But yeah, they're portals. That's obviously supposed to be a trap, but I went into that room first. It wouldn't be a particularly nasty trap anyway. It's just a bunch of rats. Excuse me. I think that only triggers once because you see the red candles there now. Didn't try walking into it again. Or did I? Nope, I didn't. Okay. So it turns out that the creature that is now Ebrietas was going to be a lot more important to the story. And in fact, Ebrietas, that design, that entity, was initially going to be Kos, and Kos was going to be, I think, the final boss in the base game. But at some point, they just decided to name it Ebrietas, and just sort of relegate it to an optional area, and give it optional boss status, basically. Then I discovered a lot of this information is going to be pretty much directly from Jerk Sans Frontiers. I'm sure there's a French pronunciation that I'm totally blowing there. But anyway, there's actually the name Ebrietas was not made for this boss either. There was actually another boss that had the name Ebrietas, and that is the Moon Presence. And I think I've mentioned before that Gehrman has some cut dialogue that refers to the Moon Presence as Flora, and it sort of further confirms, along with the rare doll dialogue, that the Moon Presence's name is in fact Flora. But before it was Flora, it was called Ebrietas. So, yeah, a lot of shifting around of names and purposes. Also, I just really tanked it on that first attempt with the brain sucker. And so another thing I found was Amygdala, which is also like an optional boss slash just something you see all over the place, you know, on various buildings and such. Boy, this guy's really spamming that attack. Amygdala apparently very early on was supposed to be the final boss, which is why you see like all those statues in the Grand Cathedral, you know, going up the stairs that resemble it very strongly. And same is true for, I think, the Moon Presence. I think there are some statues that resemble the Moon Presence in the Upper Cathedral Ward. And actually, that dialogue I talked about earlier with the Blood Minister, where he mentions the awakening of Ebrietas, he's actually referring not to what is called Ebrietas in the game now, but he's referring to the Moon Presence back when it was called Ebrietas. Also, apologies if this sounds a little random. There's a lot of information in front of me, and I'm just trying to parse it in a semi-understandable way. Jumping back to Ebrietas, it's very difficult to remember where the hell I pulled this information from, but I have heard tell that the old blood that everybody is partaking in largely comes from Ebrietas. And you know, the choir basically is, I think, holding Ebrietas in the room where she is, you know. And they, at some point, were able to commune with her, and they have been getting blood from her, and that's what, like, is the root of the beastly scourge, and basically a lot of the shit that has gone down in Yharnam. Again, I can't provide a specific source on that, but I mean, it's... Take me at my word on this little detail, okay? If you really want to check it out, it's not that hard to find the information. I'm just a lazy son of a bitch. So, it seemed kind of strange to me that, you know, this random boss who doesn't seem to have that much impact on the story overall would be the source of the scourge. But it makes more sense now, given the way that all these titles and, you know, narrative functions were shifting around. You know, because that used to be Kos, and obviously Kos is like substantially more critical to the story. Okay, now we're gonna get into what was gonna be the main thrust, the main reason for me wanting to talk about cut content in the first place. And that is the Yharnam Stone, the item that you get from Queen Yharnam after defeating her. As I think I pointed out in the previous video, it serves basically no purpose as it is in the game, other than a trophy basically that says, "Good job, you went all the dang way through the Chalice dungeons and defeated Yharnam." But there has been some cut content uncovered, and there are some, visual similarities to other items and similar descriptors that allow us to sort of not reveal its purpose, but get a little more information out of it. So, first of all, I guess we can look at it. So here it says, "The sacred heirloom of Yharnam, the Marian Queen." It says, "The queen lies dead, but her horrific consciousness is only asleep and stirs in unsettling motions." So this reminds me a lot of an item you can actually see right up there. The queenly flesh. Which, wriggles and writhes around. And as we will see in the next episode, spoilers, it's still alive, basically. And if you do a certain this or that, you can fully restore the person to whom the flesh belongs. Which is hardly a coincidence, I think, because, first of all, both people in question are queens, although you can't really bring Queen Yharnam back. But that's probably mostly a gameplay consideration thing, because Annalise you can actually talk to, and she's like the leader of a covenant and all that, whereas Yharnam is you can't talk to Yharnam, you just fight her. But anyway, it seems to me that these two items are like very similar, although the Yharnam Stone very clearly depicts a baby in, among all the viscera, most likely because Yharnam is pregnant. But regardless, they're in a similar stratum. And the other connection, aside from both of them just being royalty, Annalise and Yharnam, is that they're actually distantly related. Again, this other little fact, I'm not exactly sure where I heard it. I don't know if it's a fact or if it's inferred, but I'm fairly certain that Annalise is a descendant of Queen Yharnam and their ilk, the Thumerians, at least. And that's another reason why she is seemingly immortal. Even when what's his name, Alfred, bashes her into a pulp, or however he puts it, she can still live on, seemingly forever. The really strange thing about this whole situation is the way that you go about bringing back Annalise. Spoilers. But there is the room that Ebrietas is in is called the Altar of Despair, and the actual altar to which Ebrietas seems to be praying, or just generally sitting in front of and thinking on real hard, depicts Rom, basically the vacuous spider that we fought in the Moonside Lake. which just seems random as all hell. But I mean, when you consider who Ebrietas used to be, and just how much she got shifted around, and I believe Rom was also supposed to serve a different purpose or be in a different place in the game at some point. You know, that it wouldn't be terribly surprising, although I don't specifically remember, and I didn't write it down because, well, why would I do that? Anyway, what I'm trying to say is there's some sort of reason that it shakes down this way that we just don't know, basically. And it could even just be like, you know, the devs wanted you to be able to bring in Elise back, and they were kind of racking their brains for a way to make it make sense within the world, and they kind of maybe they threw their hands up a little bit, and they were like, oh, maybe this can be an altar, and you can offer the remains, and then she's alive again. You know, way off in her castle, far, far away. Yeah, it'll just happen. Actually, I can't even remember the prompt. What the prompt says, like whenever you offer the remains, does it say Annalise has been revived, or does it just say something has happened? I can't remember. That'll be interesting to see in the next episode. Anyhow, that's sort of a clear tell right there that, you know, some things were shifted around, and you know, it got a little messy in some places. So another interesting tidbit is concerning the Yharnam Stone is that there is some cut content in the DLC in which you can I think after you defeat the Orphan of Cause, the dialogue that plays in the following cutscene originally did not play in that cutscene, but the priest that's wandering around that we got the item from at the beginning of the episode would then deliver that line after you defeat the Orphan of Cause, and you could offer the Yharnam Stone to him. And you know, it's kind of difficult to really understand what the purpose is of giving him this this item, what the significance is to him, what his response really means, what his response in dialogue means. And you know, there's a link to Lance's video. Should be in the top right now. And you can see it for yourself. It's tough to parse, but I guess the connecting thread is the loss of a child, because, you know, the Yharnam Stone does depict a child and all this viscera, and cause, you know, the hunter basically killed the Cause's child. Very cool of him. So that's kind of a connecting thread. And I sort of just feel that they were going to put that in, whatever the final interaction was going to be, they were going to put it in just so that the Yharnam Stone would have a purpose. And I imagine it originally did in the base game. You know, you'd be able to do something or other with it, even if it didn't serve all that much purpose. You could at least, you know, in the same vein as Dark Souls 3's DLC, you could give it to somebody and they would have something to say about it. And so this would probably be that. Also worth mentioning that Bloodborne's DLC was initially going to be 2 DLCs, and eventually they decided to just mash them together. And so that, you know, that also provides for the shifting around of people and events. Actually, the priest was apparently supposed to deliver all the dialogue that I mentioned in the research hall as opposed to the spot where he currently is. So again, things are moving around. That seems to be the case with pretty much all FromSoft games. Probably true for most games that are developed, honestly. Oh geez, I nearly forgot. Okay, so speaking of cut content, there are seemingly a lot of enemies in this game that were cut for one reason or another. One of which I'll actually show off in this video is what seems to be like a final form of the moon presence. And this boss fight can actually be accessed via Chalice Glyph, which we'll see in a minute, provided by Zilly the Witch. Thank you. And we're going to be facing this boss with another character, just because this one happens to have the dungeon already created. We'll enter the dungeon here, as you can see, Chalice Glyph, SIKGC3SM. Bada boom. If you want to fight this boss yourself, give it a crack. It's really fucking strong. And obviously this is, you know, not super polished final game type stuff. It's, you know, clipping through this door. And I don't think it's even supposed to be in a dungeon. I was waiting for it to hit me, but it really was just not connecting. It's kind of tough to even get in here because he's really crowding the door. You can see the head there. That's the main indication that it's the moon presence, really. So it's just got these big long tentacles. It's got a lot of rushing attacks. It jumps up in the air sometimes. And you probably also noticed that it hits like a fucking truck. And I think this character is in like new game +3 or something. So it's pretty high level character. And the dungeons don't really scale. Like, you know, if you do a level 1 dungeon in New Game +7, you're gonna absolutely cream everything because it just sort of stays the same, really. But this boss, it just absolutely has a lot of health, deals a lot of damage. Also interesting to note is the sort of stage that it's in. Very reminiscent of the place where you fight the Orphan of Kos, actually, because it's on a beach. You can actually run out into the water, although you kind of, well, show an example right here. You at some point you're just kind of floating above the sand. There's not really water there necessarily. I mean, there is, but it's not, you know what I'm saying, all right? But yeah, this is just a neat thing that you can do. You can face another boss. You know, like I say, it's not finalized, so it's not the most amazing boss to fight, but it's novel. I think there are a couple other, there's like a beast dog type enemy that you can fight that is like a similar level of completion to this one, maybe a little less. I don't think I've actually fought it myself. But I believe Zilly the Witch also put out, you know, a couple other dungeons like this for those who are curious. And then there are also tons of low-level enemies that were also cut from the game. You know, if you want to see that kind of stuff, I think Lance, who I've already linked to a few times, has a lot of videos showing that kind of stuff off, as well as this channel. I think it's Santa DSK is how you pronounce it. Anyhow, let's jump back in the dungeons. So the final topic I want to touch on for this cut content. Oh dear God. I've summoned help and he's not helping. There we go. Hey look, it's Ebrietas. Spoiler, I guess. Interesting that you kill Ebrietas and get the chalice for this dungeon, and then she's the last boss in the dungeon. Anyhow, so the last topic I want to talk about is Gehrman. Gehrman also has some cut content, along with some not cut content that's just not seen / heard by too many people because it's sort of rare. You kind of have to go out of your way to hear it. But the cut content, first of all, affirms that, Flora is named Flora. And also, there's some contradictory stuff that is said in his cut content that, differs from his motivations and actions in the final game. At some point, Gehrman was supposed to fight Lawrence for the right to be devoured by Flora, which is just not in line with his attitude as it is now. Also, in content that is not cut, you can catch him sleeping in the garden, murmuring stuff to himself about waiting on Lawrence for like a very long time, and other things about him and Lawrence being in cahoots. And basically it seems that, at least at one point, back into cut content territory, Lawrence was supposed to be looking into blood ministration, basically to find a way to find someone who would be like worthy of taking on the nightmare / ending it. And Gehrman is basically supposed to like hold down the fort in the hunter's dream so that Lawrence can delve into the dungeons and do some research, basically. And this is why we see the bloodletting beast in Chalice dungeons, who is, as I mentioned before, thought to be Lawrence. And it also seems in the cut content that it's a little more explicit that Gehrman is the one who sets the workshop on fire after the player character defeats the Murgo's wet nurse. Whereas in the main game, you could infer it, but, there's nothing really specifically pointing to him doing it. I mean, in my mind, it was always just... It's not arson that was committed by a person, but just something that like magically happens. In the same way that one door in the cathedral ward just magically opens after you defeat the blood-starved beast. But in the cut content, it does seem that Gehrman was the one who sets the place on fire. Essentially because it's not needed anymore. Which is a little bit cavalier and maybe not necessarily in line with his thinking. In the final game, once again, just interesting stuff to think about. But if you want to know more about that particular topic, there's a video from Vaati that goes over it pretty well. And got a link for that. Links for everything, once again, down in the description. That's all the stuff I wanted to talk about. But that stuff earlier on, I was genuinely very interesting to me, and I didn't know about it until I started researching for this video. That's the power of cut content for you. And so now I've gotten my excuse to go through the Ish dungeons out of the way, and basically we got one episode left, homies. Next episode's the last one. Thank God. You didn't hear me say that. This series will finally be put to rest. Holy God. But it's gonna be a humdinger. It's gonna be a lot easier to make than this episode was, so that'll be nice for me. But thanks for watching. I'm gonna shut up now. I hope you learned something interesting in this episode. I know I sure did. But anyway, I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, take it easy.